Okay. Well, it looks like we have a pretty good turnout. I'm Staci, for those of you who don't know me. And thank you for joining us today. To let you know, we have almost every single one of our board members has joined us today for this opportunity to meet the board. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about how the webinar is going to go, and then we'll go from there. So our goal tonight is really to tell everybody in the organization what NTSAD has been working on, how we decide what our priorities should be and what our next steps should be, what our board looks like, who our board members are, and then also some information about how to become involved with the board if that's something that you're interested in. Our board, because we had such a great turnout tonight, we're not going to ask every board member to speak specifically, but we will have some board members who are giving you specific bits of information, and then we'll also have time for questions. Just a few housekeeping notes. You should be able to see most of our board members their pictures over the little screens. And I've asked all the board members to type into the chat box a little bit of information about themselves so you can find out who they are and what brought them to NTSAD. You were probably muted automatically when you came in, and we're going to ask everyone to stay on mute through most of the webinar because we have so many participants to cut back on background noise. But if you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat box and we'll answer some questions as we go. Okay. So for those of you who don't know me, like I said, I'm Staci Kallish. I am currently the president of the board of directors. I've been involved in NTSAD for pretty much my whole life because I'm the child of a Tay-Sachs disease carrier couple. So my parents were really able to benefit from NTSAD's early work on carrier screening in high-risk populations. And so they had carrier testing before they had their kids and knew that they were both Tay-Sachs carriers before I was born and before my brother was born. And so I really grew up with my mom being involved in the organization and learning a lot about Tay-Sachs and then the other related diseases and about genetics from her and from NTSAD brochures and things like that. And found it so interesting that I became a medical geneticist. So I see patients with a number of rare diseases at Penn and at CHOP here in Philadelphia. And I've been involved with the board for almost 20 years now, or about 20 years now, which is surprising to me because that sounds like a long time. And so I find the involvement with NTSAD just really meaningful. You know, I hear families say that it's the family that they never wanted to join. And, you know, my perspective in joining is a little bit different because my family was really able to benefit from NTSAD's work. But I've just felt so welcomed and so fortunate to be included as part of such an amazing group of people. So for those of you who may, some of you may be newer to NTSAD, but for those of you who've been around for a little while, you may know that we went through a strategic planning process last year. We kicked this off and spoke about it at last year's annual family conference. So if you were there, you may have heard a bit about it there. And you may have been able to participate either by survey or by there's a word I can't think of, by a video or by talking by questionnaires with the consultant who helped us with this work. And the reason why we wanted to do the strategic plan and to come up, really think about what our future should be, is that things are changing really rapidly around us at this point in time. So it's a very, very exciting point in time, and I'm sure that you guys are all aware of how much is going on in research and how much things are changing. We've had the first gene therapy clinical trial for one of our diseases started within the last year. There was also a small molecule trial that's been announced for the late onset community that we hope will be starting very, very soon. And we're really anxiously awaiting a number of additional clinical trials that we hope will be coming to the clinic in the near future. And so because of because of the dramatic changes that we've seen in testing technology and testing ability, you know, we noted that this has really impacted how our families are being diagnosed and what treatment options are available to them now, we wanted to be able to adapt to all of these changes. And so what came out of the strategic plan was really this idea that the families were the center of everything that we do at NTSAD. So in the past, we really thought about some of our goals a little bit in a segmented way. We thought about how we were supporting families in one arm and how we were advancing research in another arm and what educational goals were important in the third arm. We really came to see that these are completely interconnected and that our best service that we do provide and that we can provide to families is by building a community for all of our families. And so, our hope is really to build and to continue to grow this community where families receive support from each other, where NTSAD can provide resources for families and can provide connection to experts, and then where we're really able to convene all of the needed stakeholders. So that includes obviously researchers and physicians, it includes companies who are working on our diseases, but it also includes the individuals and the families who are affected by the diseases so that everyone can work together to advance research. So like I said, in the next few minutes, you're going to hear about a little bit about how our board is structured, hear about the efforts that we're planning to continue to support families and advance research, and then about why and how some of our current board members were able to get involved. And thanks again for joining us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Blyth.
To unmute myself. Hello, everyone. I am the immediate past president of NTSAD. I've been involved with the organization really since my daughter and nephew were diagnosed with infantile Tay-Sachs in 1999. And I've been on the board now, I think, for 8 years. Honestly, I can't remember. It doesn't really matter. It just feels like a long time and a wonderful time. And during my involvement with the organization, including my time with the board, I have seen how the board composition has shifted. In the early days, it really consisted almost entirely of family members. And of course, that is the backbone and essence of the DNA of NTSAD, and that will never change. But as the needs of the organization have grown and as our capacity and ambition has grown, so too has the expertise, the need for additional expertise. So while there is and will always be family members on the board, we also have professionals with backgrounds in the law and industry and advocacy and carrier screening and and human resources and all of these things, finance. So you will meet, as you come to meet the amazing people, you'll see that some of them are family and some of them are not, but all of them are wonderful and all of them are volunteering. This is purely a 100% volunteer job. And the mission of the board is, or the responsibility of the board is to oversee the strategic plan and execution of priorities to achieve our mission. And we have, as Staci mentioned, just completed a strategic planning process. So we have new priorities, or sort of more articulated priorities, and much of the execution of the things required to deliver on those things will be done at the committee level, and we're going to itemize what those committees are. You do not need to be a member of the board to be involved on a committee. The committees themselves are board members, but then there are working groups. Each committee will have working groups, and you do not have to be a member of the board to be on a working group. And in fact, we often recommend and have seen that involvement in a working group is a good way to learn more about the organization and decide that, yes, in fact, you would like to come onto the board. So we encourage people to raise their hand, not just to express interest in being on the board, but also to be involved in a working group. The job of the board is also to oversee the job of the executive director. So we review the executive director's performance, and the executive director's job is to oversee the staff. So the board does not oversee the staff, that's the executive director's job. We just oversee the strategic plan and the executive director. And then we are also responsible for the organization's financial health and well-being. We approve the budget every year at all of our board meetings. We check in with how fundraising is going, where our income stands, and where our expenses stand in relation to budget. The treasurer works closely with the executive director to keep that current and keep us apprised. The executive committee is the most active part of the group of the board, in that they speak, is it twice a month? I can't even remember in this moment. Once a month with the executive director, and the executive committee consists of the president, Staci, vice president, Oralea, immediate past president, me, and the treasurer, Michael Richards. And Sue will bring us issues that she's working with and really uses the executive committee as a sounding board. But the executive committee does not vote on anything. That is the board, that is the job of the board. I think that's about it. And one more thing, it's gotten so interesting. The work that NTSAD has just got, as it's become more exciting, particularly around clinical trials and research, I will say the work of the board has gotten more and more interesting.
I guess I'm up to talk about.
Thanks. Yep, thanks, Oralea.
To talk about family services. First of all, I'm Oralea Marquardt. I'm the current vice president of the board. I became part of NTSAD in 2007, shortly after my son William was diagnosed with GM1 gangliosidosis. We attended our first conference about 2 months after his diagnosis, and I met the family who I never knew existed. Is the first time I felt really like other people got what we were going through, and because of that experience, I chose to continue on with NTSAD throughout his life and after. I joined the board in 2016, but before that, I was involved in many different aspects of NTSAD, such as being on the family conference committee and just being at different parts of task force that were developed for different reasons throughout the years. So, and I really value being part of the board just because it's my way of giving back to this wonderful organization and make meaning from my own experience and to help other families. So the family services, I think, as Staci said, is really the core of what NTSAD is. Supporting families has always been and will always be the center of everything that we do. And we do this through various programs headed by our two amazing staff members, Deanna Pangonis, who is the Director of Family Services, and she's often the first point of contact for families who are searching for what does this disease mean to me. And when they connect with our organization, she helps create the resources that they need to connect with others or to give education and how we can provide help to them. And then we also have Becky Benson, who's a fellow NTSAD mom of Miss Elliott, and who is now our conference coordinator, and who not only plans that yearly conference, which is really the core of our family services, but she also helps provide support throughout the year to all the families who are new and existing and who are bereaved as well. So through their work, we really try to do wraparound services to help our families as they go through the different stages of caring for someone with Tay-Sachs, GM1, Sandhoff, or Canavan diseases. I really think the heart of what we do is the peer-to-peer support. which is driven by building connections with families. I know Monica, who has served on our board for many years, was the first person who reached out to me and said, hey, I know what you're going through. So that peer-to-peer support and building connections has always been part of NTSAD, and now we're doing it in a bit different ways. We're leveraging the internet through Facebook to help build those connections. Newly just started this year with Zoom calls to help families meet together on a weekly basis, to just provide that extra set of connection as they need. Also, part of family services is that we have some family funds that have been set up through the years that help families with some of the practical needs. We assist them in obtaining maybe some equipment that they couldn't, whether families have donated equipment to the organization that then gets donated on to other families, and we help with the shipping costs of that. We also help just through those family funds. They have different ways to get support through making some memories and experiences as well. So we help with taking those family funds and making them available to families of NTSAD. And then finally, I think, you know, the annual conference is the most meaningful part of the family services. It brings all the families together for one weekend where we can just be normal and be in a little bubble of support and be able to have those private conversations, as well as conversations that are driven through either educational pieces or learning about new research that has come out, and just really helping bridge the feelings of isolation that often occur with these diseases. And as both Blyth and Staci said, you know, things are changing rapidly right now for our families with the advent of clinical trials. So family services we are aware of that, and we are continuing to recognize that our families' needs will also change. So just helping provide research and education to our families about that research and what that means to them, as well as helping with the emotional aspects that occur with clinical trials and being there to support them through all that. So our family services is broad, and it keeps changing and as dynamic as we try to meet all the needs of our families, whether it's emotional or practical or educational. That's what the family services really does. And like I said before, it's the core of what we do and what drives us to continue to do the work that we do, whether it's in research or other areas of support. So with that, I will pass it along to Jerry to talk a little bit about the research aspects.
Great, thanks, Orly. I'm Gerald Cox, and I joined the board last year, 2019. I've been a clinical geneticist like Staci for a long time, about 30 years, and I've been in industry in biotech for about 20 years. Most of that time has been with Genzyme, and it was through that connection that I first started attending the annual patient conferences about 8 years ago, as Genzyme and Sanofi were developing a small molecule they thought might be helpful as a treatment. And we realized there was very little known about the natural history of the various conditions. And so we set out to every year assess a group of late onset GM2 individuals to better characterize their condition, with the hope that that information could be useful for clinical trial. Well, I left Genzyme in 2016, and I've always kept in touch with Sue and several of the other people with NTSAD, and I was looking for a way to contribute. And joining the board seemed like a good fit for me because of the really exciting period of time that the NTSAD associated diseases are at right now, where all the diseases are heading into clinical trials, and that has been my background for the past 20 years. So earlier this year, I got involved with the research strategy as part of the large strategic plan, and really thinking about how best NTSAD should prioritize different promising areas of research and which areas should be funded or otherwise have NTSAD resources deployed. And so we started with thinking about, what are the different large areas of research that we should cover. And so we broke it into 4 areas. One of them we call basic science and translational research. And that is basically research done in a laboratory that helps us to better understand the underlying causes of the various conditions and what types of new treatment approaches might be out there, or ways to study individuals might be out there that we should be aware of. The second area we identified was clinical development. So that really means clinical trials. And again, we have thought about what are ways that you can show that a drug is actually working. And as probably most of you know, clinical trials use measures that aren't necessarily part of standard clinical practice. So we often have to start from ground zero to think, based on what the patient's needs are, what types of ways are there that we can measure and quantify those needs in any response to treatment. And typically these are done through clinical trials, but there's also been a growing awareness that information collected in the real world can also be very helpful for clinical development and help support whatever changes are seen in clinical trials. And as you all know, FDA regulates the approval of drugs through clinical trials, and we identified the FDA as a key stakeholder that needs to get to know NTSAD and needs to get to know the diseases that NTSAD advocates for. And so we're also, as part of this task force, looking at ways to engage the FDA. Third area that we've identified is early diagnosis. And with early diagnosis, you can think of it as being the time from the onset of symptoms until an actual diagnosis. That's what we call symptom-based diagnosis, and that's how most people, I would say, are diagnosed. And then there's also early diagnosis that occurs at birth, what we call newborn screening. And those are somewhat different areas or problems to tackle. So we decided that they would each be best served by a different group of people looking at them. And so early symptomatic diagnosis, we've recognized that there's many different companies, DNA testing companies that are able to provide diagnoses, but not necessarily using the same types of gene panels. And so, we want to be able to look into that further to see if we could identify ways of standardizing testing across laboratories, as well as figuring out what the most efficient ways are to educate physicians about these diseases in order to decrease the time from symptom onset to diagnosis. And then finally, newborn screening is something that is already done in the US for many diseases. And there's an actual process to get a new disease put onto newborn screening. And so we're looking into ways that diseases like Tay-Sachs, Sandhoff, GM1, and Canavan's could be screened and diagnosed in a dried blood spot. And when you think of it, there's different ways. You can look at enzyme activity level, You could look at the substance that accumulates in the diseases, or you could do DNA testing, or potentially all three. And so we want to look into that further to see what the process would be to get newborn screening for each of the NTSAD related diseases. So, what we're planning on doing is for each of these 4 areas, we have a small group of experts, and NTSAD is blessed with really an outstanding group of scientists and clinicians. So we're putting them to work and over the next 6 months, reviewing what we know about each of these areas, what we don't know, what we think are really promising areas for future inquiry, and most importantly, what are their specific recommendations for NTSAD to invest money or provide some type of access to individual patients, or using NTSAD's leverage as a patient advocacy group to engage with the FDA. And our plan is at the end of this year, there'd be a very specific set of recommendations to help propel NTSAD forward next year. So that is the end of my presentation.
Well, thank you, Jerry, and Oralea and Blyth. I think because we have a lot of board members, but actually not as many non-board members as we had hoped for, that we may shift our plans a little bit and go to the question and answer portion and see if anybody who has joined us tonight has any questions. And so I see Eric already raising his hand, so that's perfect. I was about to say Eric had a question already. So Eric, if you can, I think Sue can unmute you, and then you can ask your question.
Oh, I'm muted.
Good, go ahead. You're unmuted now. Go ahead.
Cool. Anyway, I've heard lots of discussion about GM1, Canavan, standoff diseases, which is the most fatal and serious about, especially about infantile Tay-Sachs. But there's also late onset Tay-Sachs, which I'm the executive member, and my mom is the president of the regional Tay-Sachs in the West Coast. And unfortunately, I cannot go to every conference because I have a stomach problem, gastro problem, which also I know Karen Croft has as well, which is Alan Croft's mother. And I do my best to go to any conference on the West Coast or in the middle of the states, like I went to San Diego and to Dallas. I couldn't go Florida or North Carolina because they were too far east. But anyway, our organization has raised a lot of money for Leon's Tay-Sachs, basically because that's the focus of our disease. And also I was on the news and wrote articles about Leon's Tay-Sachs, making people aware of Tay-Sachs and Leon's Tay-Sachs. We used Amazon, saw Amazon to raise money, and we've done everything. Used Bing for good. I mean, because we can't always have we've had benefits, but like I wish that NTSAD would also acknowledge Leon's Tay-Sachs, because we're also a very important disease to you guys, because if there's a treatment or cure for late onset, it could help strongly Tay-Sachs family. So that's
Well,
Yeah.
absolutely. And thanks for sharing that, Eric. We certainly do know that, as an organization, one of the challenges that NTSAD has is that we represent, 4 different diseases, and Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff and GM1 and Canavan, and that for a number of those diseases, they have different, forms, so infantile and juvenile and late onset forms. So it's a lot of diseases and, a lot of sort of different diseases, even though they have a lot of overlap. And so, in terms of talking about our research agenda, we certainly have worked with researchers on all forms of all of our diseases. And you probably know from the conferences that you came to that we had researchers even coming to conferences so that individuals with late onset Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff could participate in research right at our conference. And when we look at how we spend research funding, and when we look at our family support services, we do incorporate individuals with late onset Tay-Sachs in all of those in all of those decision making. Right now at the present, we have one active member of our board, Sophia Pesachinci, who is part of the late onset Tay-Sachs community as a mother of someone with late onset Tay-Sachs. So we certainly try to keep the perspective of all of our families involved.
When my mom, actually I met Sophia, excuse me, in San Francisco way back 25 years ago when I first was diagnosed with late onset.
Okay.
Yeah.
Remember, hey Sophia. Remember Sophia in Palo
Of course I do. Of course I do.
Good, how are you? And
Fighting,
cool.
all of us.
Yeah.
And we've known our researchers for like years. Like Anna Kaplan, Fran Platt,
Mm-hmm.
Sue,
Good. Well,
Sue Hopper.
great.
Eric, we are very involved, and lots is it's a disease that we continuously talk about. So I don't want you to worry and think that late onset Tay-Sachs patients have been a second priority. That's not true at all. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Sophia. Anybody else who is on the call who has questions about the board? It looks like Cedra has a question. We can unmute Cedra. And while we're doing that, just so if there's anyone who's participating who has a question and doesn't want to speak, you can also type your questions into the chat box, or you can wave.
Hi, I have 2 questions. First of all, thank you for having this opportunity. It's wonderful to see everybody and to hear about the great progress that you are all achieving. The first question is, how and when did you decide to focus on 4 diseases rather than all of the allied diseases that we once included?
It's a good question. I don't know if anyone else wants to answer. I can just keep answering questions. So, when we had talked about, NTSAD and Tay-Sachs and allied diseases for a long time, but I think our family community really coalesced around these 4 diseases. And these were the families who were most active in our groups as we developed, online groups, with the coming of technology, and the families who were really attending our conferences. And as the research became so much more clinical, we really found that it's a challenge enough to focus on 4 diseases. So, when I first became involved in the organization and we were supporting research projects, we were supporting very early research, not necessarily in one of our 4 diseases, but we were looking at projects that would have application across many lysosomal diseases or many leukodystrophies, because all of the research was very early. But now that the research is very disease specific, we've certainly found that adequately connecting families from 4 diseases and adequately advocating for research for 4 diseases is challenging enough. Also, we've seen that many of the other diseases have formed their own support groups, which is certainly newer compared to the beginning of NTSAD, now that families, even with tiny diseases where there's 20 people known across the country, are able to connect because of technology. So we found that some of those other groups disease groups have formed and are supporting those families.
Okay, thanks. And the second question is, how do you or whomever, who decides which patients are part of the clinical trials? And are they double-blind trials?
I'm gonna let Jerry answer that one if he wants to.
Sure. So, clinical trials come in all shapes and forms. There's early trials that evaluate the safety and dosing of drugs, and there's later stage trials that are used to confirm the safety and efficacy of drugs. And every clinical trial, has specific objectives, and based on those objectives, there'll be certain patient profiles that the studies will want to include in that study, because those are particular individuals that may best be able to demonstrate through the effects of the drug whether or not the drug is working and whether it's safe. And so whoever writes the clinical protocol, which I would say in most cases would be a company working with expert physicians, they would ask, what are you trying to demonstrate in this clinical trial? And then from that, put together a list of patient characteristics that might be best suited for that trial. Many of the early trials may not include a placebo arm, but again, that kind of depends on the nature of the drug being tested, and the types of assessments that are being done. And, as you're probably aware, some trials enroll adults first, others are enrolling children first, and it really comes down to the specifics of the drug and what people believe the drug might be able to do, and its safety profile.
Thank you.
Sure.
So does anybody else have any questions that they want to ask or to share now? I think that everyone else who's joined us has joined us by phone, so we don't see anyone waving. So in the meantime, certainly if you have questions, feel free to let us know, either by chat or by waving or unmuting and letting us know. But I think that we can continue as we had planned, and I'm going to ask just a few of our other board members in our remaining time to maybe spend about 2 minutes or so letting us know why they chose to become involved in NTSAD's board and how they became involved. So Michael, if you don't mind going next, I would appreciate that.
Sure, thank you, Staci. Michael Richards here. I am the current treasurer of NTSAD. Been involved with the organization since 2015, when my son Cooper was diagnosed with GM1. My oldest son and I came down to the conference in Virginia about 6 weeks post-diagnosis, not having any idea what was happening in our lives at the time. It was just a whirlwind, and walked into the room and was embraced by this organization wholesomely. And from that point forward, I've been involved in just every family conference since, getting involved at the family conferences. Staci cornering me. What do you think about the board? What do you think about this? And just over time, expressing my interest to Staci and having those chats and others on the board led to me joining the board 2 years ago. And that was a year past Cooper's passing in 2017. So it was really, for me, I felt like a way to honor him and to make sure we find a cure so that no other families have to go through what we have so far, and to treat the kids that we do have that are affected. And so I've been with the board just 2 years now, a year as treasurer, and it's been a great time so far. And I'm looking forward to hopefully continuing the charge with everyone to get to a cure for all of the diseases.
Thanks, Michael. I will say that one way to become involved is if a board member approaches you. You don't have to wait for me specifically to corner you. But another way is also to contact us if you're interested. And then I'm going to ask Carla Steckman to let us let you guys know about her involvement in the board next.
Thanks, Staci. I first got to know NTSAD in 2016, maybe a few weeks after my daughter Talia was diagnosed with infantile Tay-Sachs. Diana was that first person. I emailed the organization and she called me the very next morning. And after I got off the phone with her, I just turned to my mother and I said, I think I see a way forward. I don't feel as alone in this. So family support has been so crucial, and I've felt always so appreciative knowing that I had that access to community, because through NTSAD, through the Facebook page, and through the conference that I attended, I got to know a lot of people and I felt less alone, and that was really important. And then about a month after Talia passed away in 2017, I went to the Imagine and Believe event in Boston, and I gave a speech to try and encourage people to donate money. And I got to see sort of NTSAD as their professional aspect, and the scientists and the way that they draw everyone together there. And so it just felt like a natural progression to continue the relationship with the organization. And I was eager to be on the board. And so I've been on the board for a year now.
Thanks, Carla. Ruth, will you tell us about your participation, please?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I usually defer to Sue because I can never remember how long I've been on the board. It's probably 10-ish years, give or take. My brother was born with Tay-Sachs in 1964. He was my younger brother, so I'm dating myself a bit. And it was before there was amniocentesis, before there was screening. So I kind of grew up with my parents being very involved in very early stages of the organization and seeing it grow. It was in the New York area, so there was a lot of activity, a lot of momentum. So it has literally probably been a big part of my life, but I would say, having only gotten very involved in sort of my adult years. So first, I think just helping on some of the events, and then slowly but surely easing my way onto the board. I bring a lot of nonprofit as well as small business experience, and I like to think that I've helped in the challenge and the journey of helping NTSAD to think strategically, and have helped to kind of ask some of those hard questions about who we are as an organization and why we do what we do, and then actually how do we talk about what we do. And I guess I would just end by saying, you know, I'm involved. I kind of put it in the chat, but you know, times have definitely changed, but I think it's ridiculous and sad and awful that we still see families suffering the way that my family did in different ways. And I have to say that's taken me some getting used to as well. At the time in '64 and early '70s, there was no having kids at home. So support and services have changed tremendously. And so it's been interesting to be a part of that and watch that evolve. And I'm excited to, I think, still be on for one more year, Sue. And the strategic planning has been a wonderful experience. And the best part has been getting to meet families. I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you, Ruth. Kevin, can you share with us a little bit about how you got involved and why you got involved and stayed involved?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. And I've got a long history with the organization. Back in 1995, our son Matthew was born with Tay-Sachs disease. We came to our first conference in 1997, been in every conference since, and wanted to get involved early with the organization. So got involved in different committees from quality assurance. Then we worked hard to establish the research initiative together. And it was a very big passion of ours, both in the area we come from, which is South Florida, as well as on a national level. So we have an organization in South Florida that's an affiliate of the national organization. And so we've been able to work together between what the needs are of the region and what the needs are nationally to exchange best ideas and best practices. I was able to continue to commit to the organization in various degrees of progression. I was pleased to have the opportunity to continue on with the executive committee as a vice president, and then as the past president, now past president. And you really can enter this organization at any level, and you can grow to whatever extent you desire. And obviously, I'm still here because under Jerry's leadership with the research initiative, we've got some work to finish, which is to cure a few diseases. So that's it's really how you make it, how you embrace this organization, and the people and the professionalism is really unparalleled with any other organization I've been involved with. So I'm glad to be able to share with you.
Thank you, Kevin. Just a few more people that we're going to hear from before we wrap it up. I'm going to ask Jamie if she'll tell you, she's another one of our newer board members, if she will tell you a little bit about how and why she got involved.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jamie Ring. I'm one of the newer board members. I joined last July, but I've known NTSAD since about 2005, so about 15 years. I've participated in Imagine and Believe both on the professional and the personal side many, many times. That's one of my, professionally as a patient advocate in the biotechnology industry, it was always one of the events I most looked forward to going to. As I mentioned, I have had a career focused on rare disease patient advocacy, working within biotechnology companies, focused really on engaging the patient communities that those respective companies were working to develop treatments on. I think it's obviously a really complex, exciting time for the TASAC's communities, with the introduction of a number of different corporate partners who are looking to potentially develop treatments for the spectrum of diseases covered by NTSAD. And I think that my contributions here are really focused on how can we help ensure that the true patient perspective and the unmet needs of the community are understood by these industry partners, that the patient voice is incorporated into clinical trial design and into the drug development process. I've had the privilege of being involved in a number of different drug approvals for rare genetic diseases in both lysosomal storage disorders and also more recently the first gene therapy that was approved by the FDA for a genetic disease, a form of inherited blindness. And so I do have quite a dearth of experience in patient involvement and engagement in drug development. And so I'm excited, and for the last many months have really enjoyed helping to sort of bring that perspective to the NTSAD team, just in terms of how we can engage industry to really make sure that the collaborations are focused on mutual benefit and on respect for independence, and that patient perspective can really be incorporated into the work of those companies, hopefully to bring a better developed treatment to the communities. So it's really a pleasure and frankly a privilege for me to be a part of this board, and I appreciate being a part of tonight's call.
Thanks. And then I'm going to ask just for one more for Brian Manning to tell us about his involvement in NTSAD.
Thanks, Staci. So as I listen to all these stories, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm part of this great organization and a great group of people on the board, is because of the extensive backgrounds and experiences we bring to the table. It's just, just listening to all these stories and what, kind of effects that we look at as far as the experiences that we bring to the table and what we want to be involved in. I mean, my story starts in 2003. My son was diagnosed with Tay-Sachs disease, and I got involved in NTSAD because it was the right organization to help support us get through a very difficult time. But over the years, my passion has grown for the families that are going through the same types of experiences that we went through. And I want to be able to give back and to kind of honor that legacy that my son started for us. But it goes much deeper than that as well. And I'll pick on Kevin a little bit too, because it was Kevin Romer that came to me and asked me, you know, would you like to kind of further your experience with NTSAD and to be a part of, you know, the executive committee and follow that course? And I did. And at first I was nervous, but I come to find out over those 6 years that I spent time learning a little bit more about the organization, not just what it does for the families, but what it does for the entire community around these diseases. It became part of my passion. And so today, you know, even though I'm not part of the executive committee, I continue on the board for those reasons. And, you know, it's just, I'm very thankful to be part of such a great group and a great organization. And so really appreciate the opportunity to serve.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks to everyone who shared their story tonight. We have just a few minutes left in case anybody has any last questions. And if not, then we will wrap up here. So I hope that for everyone who participated tonight, or for anyone who is watching this at a later time by video, that you were able to get some sense of our board, of what kind of work we're doing and what our priorities really are for the next few years, of who our board members are. I hope that if you're interested in learning more about the NTSAD board or potentially becoming involved in the future, that you'll reach out to one of us. Thanks, everyone.